Representatives, I'd like to welcome you to the House of Representatives chamber. This afternoon, we are here to honor Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe, who lost his life while he was in service to the United States of America back in when he was a prisoner of war. I'd like to also recognize at this time some of his family members that are here with us. His brother Gil Thorpe, here with us. And his sister Nancy Windergren. Lieutenant Robert Thorpe never had a memorial service. This afternoon, we are going to present that memorial service for him, to give to him the honor that he so rightly deserved. At this time, I'd like to ask General Petrarca to ask for the posting of the colors. Please rise.
Parade to colors.
This time, I'd like to ask Chief Master Sergeant, retired United States Air Force John Gallo, who was the president of the Permanent Advisory Council to Veterans Affairs, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Post the colors.
Our invocation this afternoon will be delivered by Chaplain Colonel Robert Martin Minash of the Rhode Island Army National Guard.
Please unite with me in prayer according to your own faith tradition. Our Creator and Sustainer, we humbly request your presence as we honor Lieutenant Thorpe. Fall upon all of the love and the support that his family deserves. Remember him with honor and holy name we pray. Amen.
You may be seated. It is my honor this afternoon to introduce to you, to deliver greetings on behalf of the state of Rhode Island, the Honorable Lincoln D. Chafee, Governor, Captain General of the state of Rhode Island. Governor Chafee.
Thank you, Representative Gallison. I am very proud to join with Chairman Gallison, Representative Martin, Mayor Fung, just came in, I believe, Brigadier General Petrarca, Ken Dooley, other members of the legislature that are here to honor the outstanding memory of a Rhode Islander and American, Second Lieutenant Robert Thorpe. And I know there's a pilot here who flew with Lieutenant Thorpe on his final mission. And on behalf of the people of Rhode Island, I do want to thank Captain Lewis Lockhart for being here today and for your service to the country. Thank you for coming from Tennessee here to Rhode Island for this ceremony, Captain Lockhart. If there's any one piece of Lieutenant Thorpe's history that best represents who he was and the strength of his character, it is perhaps one of the simplest of them all, that an 18-year-old Bob Thorpe, a recent graduate of Cranston High School, ate as much as he possibly could to meet the minimum weight requirement for entry into the Army Air Corps. This speaks to both his extreme youth, in fact, he was just a slight lad of only 18, and to his level of commitment to serving his country. He wanted to join the Army Air Corps. And after stuffing himself, he did make weight, and he began his training to be a pilot. Unfortunately, he was shot down and captured in the waters off New Guinea in 1944. There, young Lieutenant Thorpe conducted himself in the same way he had throughout his short life. Despite brutal treatment, he did not cower. Representative Martin has told me many times as we march in parades and talk about this incident, Representative Martin keeps saying, this man went to his death bravely and defiantly. Despite the pain of the loss, the Thorpe family back in Edgewood could take some comfort in the knowledge that their son died as he had lived, bravely and with honor. This comfort remains to this day. I'm very proud, therefore, to honor the memory of Second Lieutenant Robert Thorpe and to formally recognize on behalf of the state of Rhode Island his great valor and courage. Nearly 70 years after Bob Thorpe's final flight, I know that one chapter remains in this difficult story. So in closing, I would hope to state my hope that the next time we gather, it will be to lay the remains of Lieutenant Thorpe finally brought back to this country he served so well by the family he loved so much. This outcome that Lieutenant Thorpe and his Thorpe family deserve. Thank you all much for being here to honor this extraordinarily brave Rhode Islander, Second Lieutenant Robert Thorpe of Cranston. Thank you.
So to deliver the greetings on behalf of Major General Kevin McBride, the Adjutant General of the state of Rhode Island, this afternoon joining us is Brigadier General Charles Petrarca of Rhode Island Army National Guard. General.
Thank you very much, Representative. All I can say is that we truly do appreciate Lieutenant Thorpe's service, especially one aviator to another. I've got close to 2,000 hours of helicopter time myself, and every time that we do take to the sky, whether it be in peacetime or in war, we never really do know whether we're going to come back or not. Sometimes our government-maintained aircraft are not the best, but we do the best that we can with them. So I'm honored to speak to such a true hero and a great American and a great Rhode Islander. To the family, I say to you that you should be proud of his service. I'm sure you are and have been for many years. And I echo the governor's thoughts that I hope at some point that there's an accounting and his remains are brought home to rest. Thank you.
As Governor Chafee mentioned, the driving force behind this memorial service today is Representative Peter Martin from District 75 in Newport. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Representative Martin for an introduction of Captain Lewis Lockhart. Representative Martin.
Thank you, Chairman Gallison. The driving force behind this event is a couple of my friends, Ken Dooley, who introduced me to this idea, and when he told me about this story of Robert E. Thorpe, and retired Sergeant Major Ed Kane, who pulled us together and gave me the encouragement of how we could make this event into a proper celebration. It gives me great pleasure to have met the people involved in this situation, the family, Gil Thorpe, his family, and Captain Lewis Lockhart, who came here with his nephew, Doug Hale. And I would actually like to ask Captain Lewis Lockhart to come up here and say a few words about this person that he actually served with when he was a lead pilot. So we'll have him come up, say a few words, greeting him from as far away as Tennessee. Thank you, Captain.
I think it is a great privilege for me to be here in order to honor Bob. I flew with Bob on many missions before the one where he went down. Although I was on that flight that same day, Bob was in another flight. We didn't know what happened to him when he didn't return to the base for the debriefing. Bob's closest friend and tent mate, Fred Toby, and I were on a search mission for him the next day. Of course, we found no remains. It was only many, many years later that we found out what happened to him through the efforts of Ken Dooley. And I think it is only proper that Bob gets the recognition today that he deserves as a true American hero.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you again for taking the time out to fly up here from Tennessee for this event. The story of Robert Thorpe was told to me by my friend Ken Dooley. I would like to ask him to come up and say a few words about what he learned in his research about Robert Thorpe and what this means to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I never met Bob Thorpe. My family moved into that Edgewood neighborhood a few months after Bob left for the Army Air Corps. But I did become very friendly with Gil. We were the same age. I had 2 brothers in the Second World War, and he had 1. We weren't really too worried. Nothing happened to the good guys. It was only the bad guys that got hurt or killed. And at that time, John Wayne was winning the war in the Pacific, and Errol Flynn, when he wasn't Robin Hood, was fighting the Nazis in Europe. That all changed almost overnight when 2 Army officers came to the Thorpe household in 1944 and explained that Bob was missing in action. Suddenly, I guess we all realized that bad things could happen to the good guys. Not much happened immediately after the war. Bob was still listed as missing. And then in 1947, the war crime trial started at Yokohama. And an article appeared in the Providence Journal for the first news about Bob Thorpe. He hadn't been lost at sea. He had been captured on an island called Kururu in New Guinea, tortured and beheaded. And the journal also announced that the 5 naval officers responsible for his death were being court-martialed. And then a subsequent article explained that one of them received 20 years, 3 of them received life in prison, and the 5th, Karu Okumo, who was in charge of the execution, was sentenced to death. In 1949, Okumo was executed at Sugamo prison. The other 4 were all out within 5 years. And frankly, I thought that was the end of the story. I went off to 4 years in the Air Force where my weapon of choice was a typewriter. I never saw a shot fired in anger. Then I returned to Rhode Island, and after I graduated from college, I left for Connecticut and New York. The years passed, and I was in Sarasota. My brother sent me an article about the fact that Gil was still trying to find the remains of his brother. So I called Gil. I hadn't spoken to him in over 40 years. And Gil explained that he had been told that an actual map showing where Bob was buried existed. So I said, you know, Gil, under the Freedom of Information Act, you can get the records of the court-martial. Well, Gil had never done it, and I had, so it was agreed that I would get the records. And I wish I could tell you it took one letter. It took about 6 trips to MacDill and about 7 to Washington, D.C., and a veiled threat about going public until I finally got the court-martial records. And I can still remember returning to my hotel room, and I spent the whole night reading them. It was a horror show. But 2 important points emerged at this court-martial. First of all, Bushido, the spirit warriors, the kamikaze kids, they all disappeared. And they were replaced by a lot of cowards pointing fingers at each other. I did it because he told me. I was ordered. I didn't do it. And Okumo, the man who was in charge of the execution, said he had been instructed by Captain Nato, who in turn was ordered by Admiral Sato. And by the cover-up started 2 years earlier. Right after the war ended, Captain Steed, an Australian, started investigating what happened to 2 Australian pilots and an American, Bob Thorpe. And through Sato and a surgeon, they concocted this story in which these 3 poor prisoners developed malaria, and despite the most heroic efforts, they all died in the prison hospital. But Sato told them they were buried with full military honors. They even turned over the remains of Japanese soldiers trying to pass them off. Well, it didn't work. And Sato turned over the information to American authorities. And then in 1948, the 5 went on trial. 2 of them had already committed suicide, a man by Admiral Sato, and I don't know if it's politically correct, but an animal by the name of Ogawa, who jumped into the open grave and violated Bob's body. He also committed suicide. The other 5 stood trial, and they all had their excuses. Ogama explained he had been ordered by Noto, but it was Ogama who did plead guilty. He came up with the creative idea of using Bob Thorpe for target practice prior to his execution. And Fujihara and Yamamoto, who actually fired at Bob, said they were only following orders. Odazawa, the man who actually beheaded Bob, the same man who had cautioned the officers not to shoot him above the waist because it would make it very difficult to behead him, and presented an elaborate Bushido ceremony in which Bob was forced to kneel in front of an open grave as he washed the sword in the neck, and in his performance he made some of the soldiers there laugh. This is the same man, when he was arrested by the MPs, he pleaded to be left alone because he was the sole responsibility of his family. And the other real surprise I got from these records, I didn't know it at the time, the Japanese war criminals were defended by American attorneys. A Boston attorney by the name of Peters actually defended these 5. And he made a very credible presentation. He explained, since Japan had never ratified the Geneva Convention, which called for the treatment of prisoners, they weren't responsible for it. And then he mentioned the military code of the Japanese. Yes, it was quite brutal, but it was the military code. So when they Bataan Death March, rape of Nanking, the Chinese and Korean comfort women, that was all covered. So Peters asked that they've served certain sentences, but certainly not death. Well, as I said, Okuma was eventually executed. And after I read the court-martial records, I really didn't know if I should share them with Gil, but Gil's Bob's brother, so he read them too. And after, I decided you can learn so much from records and flight records. And I reached out to the former members, living members of the 39th Fighter Squadron. And that's when I first started with a man by the name of John Dunbar, who didn't know Bob that well, but he told me about Bob's best friend, who lived less than an hour away. So I called Fred, and I met with him. Wonderful guy. He had gone all the way through flight training with Bob. He'd even met Bob's mother when they got their wings. He roomed in the same tent as Bob in Gusepp, and they went on many missions together. And then it was through Fred Toby that I was put in touch with Lou Lockhart. And Lou Lockhart told me some great stories about Bob and Fred and what they went through. The 39th Fighter Squadron had a very proud heritage. It started in the First World War, and it had pilots like Jimmy Doolittle and Eddie Rickenbacker. But in 1942, things were not going that well for the 5th Air Force and the 39th because they were flying very cumbersome P-39s and P-40s. They couldn't maneuver with the Zeros. So the Japanese had control of that air war throughout 42. And then Lou Lockhart arrived with other guys in the P-38s. And by the end of the year, the Army Air Force had complete control of the skies over New Guinea. The ground war was still raging. And Bob and Lou and Fred flew many escort missions against Hollandia, Rabaul, and Lou loves to tell me stories about the other pilots. I had to learn from Fred Toby that on one mission, Lou's plane was so shot up he had to make a crash landing. Another time he took off in a P-47 that blew a tire, and he escaped just seconds before it turned into a raging inferno. And on that day when, as Lou pointed out, when Bob went missing, he didn't add that the 39th had been grounded because of weather, so he and Fred broke regulations and went to look for their friend Bob. At a time when a normal rotation for many pilots was 25 or 30 missions, Lou Lockhart, the greatest warrior to come out of Tennessee since Davy Crockett, flew 171 missions. The Thorpes lived with this story for almost 70 years, and I had about 6 years, and it really wasn't going anywhere. And a couple of months ago, I had breakfast with Peter Martin. I think I stuck him for the check, I usually do. And I told him about the story about Bob Thorpe. And he looked at me and said, "We have to do something for this young man." And I thought, I've heard that before. But anyway, Peter got me in touch with Ed Kane, and the next thing I knew, I was talking to a veterans committee, and all of this happened. And I couldn't help but think when the governor was speaking today about another member of the greatest generation, Senator John Chafee, who will never be forgotten. And I'm so pleased with this ceremony because of it. This state and this nation will know there once lived a man by the name of Robert E. Thorpe, who stood on a lonely beach and faced a group of barbarians with courage and determination and dignity, and who, in the words of one of his tormentors, died magnificently. There's a verse on a memorial here in Providence, and it goes like this: "So nigh is grandeur to our dust, so near to God is man. When duty whispers, lo, thou must, the youth replies, I can." And with those words, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote the perfect epitaph for Robert E. Thorpe. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ken. Thank you. We really appreciate your words this afternoon. This time I'd like to present to you the Honorable Alan Fung, Mayor of the City of Cranston. Mayor Fung.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It really is an honor to be here with the governor, yourself, Representative Martin, as well as all the members of the General Assembly on this very historic day where we have an opportunity to honor a true hero. And I want to take a moment to really thank Representative Martin, the Chairman, for inviting me to recognize a true Cranstonian who's done so much for not only the lives of the people who he impacted during the time that he was in Cranston, but for our country, as we heard from the fine words of Ken as he recounted the story of Lieutenant Thorpe. But also, we have an opportunity to honor another true American hero, and that's with the captain who is here today from Tennessee, and we're honored to have you here today. It gives me great privilege and pleasure to be here with all of you, especially all of the distinguished members of the military and many of the veterans who have all served and allowed us to do what we do every single day. And also each and every Rhode Islander, each and every American, to enjoy the liberties and freedoms that sometimes we take for granted. But it is because of the sacrifices of individuals like Lieutenant Thorpe, like the captain, that we enjoy what we do every single day. So today, on behalf of the residents of the city of Cranston, it gives me great pleasure to present two proclamations. And if you would indulge me as I read both of them into the record. The first one is for Lieutenant Thorpe, and whereas Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe grew up in the Edgewood section of Cranston, attending Cranston Public Schools. He was a graduate of Cranston High School, enlisted in the Army Corps in 1941, received his wings in 1942, and became one of the first pilots to be trained in the P-47. He joined the 39th Fighter Squadron, known as the Lafayette, in World War I, and included pilots such as Jimmy Doolittle and Eddie Rickenbacker at Gassop, New Guinea in 1944. Lieutenant flew strafing and bombing missions against Japanese bases in New Guinea and helped the 51st Air Force reclaim the skies to protect Australia from invasion by the Japanese. He was shot down while strafing a Japanese air base, captured and executed, brutally executed, as Ken indicated, by the Japanese. whereas the records concerning the court-martials of the 5 Japanese convicted of torturing and beheading the lieutenant and the disposition of his remains were sealed for more than 67 years. Walter and Nora Thorpe were told repeatedly that their son's remains were not recoverable, even though a detailed map of his burial site was provided during the war crime trials at Yokohama in 1948. Whereas Gil Thorpe and Nancy Thorpe Widergren never wavered in their efforts to find the truth about the death of their brother. Therefore, it gives me great privilege and pleasure as the mayor of Cranston to honor the entire Thorpe family and Lieutenant Thorpe for their devotion in uncovering the heroism of their brother for refusing to supply military information to the enemy, a decision that led to the brutality surrounding his execution. I proclaim today, Friday, May 17th, Robert E. Thorpe Day within the city of Cranston, so that all Cranston residents will know about his legacy and what he sacrificed for all of us. And this will never be forgotten within the city of Cranston.
Mr. Thorpe, on behalf of the Rhode Island House of Representatives, the House passed a resolution in honor of your brother, Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe. And at this time, Representative Martin will present that resolution to you along with a citation from the House of Representatives. Thank you very much. Captain Lewis, the Rhode Island House of Representatives has a resolution in honor of your being here and in honor of your service to the United States of America. And at this time, our reading clerk, Francis McCabe, is going to read that resolution.
House Resolution honoring Captain Lewis Lockhart for his heroism during World War II, introduced by Representatives Martin, Gallison, Abney, Newberry, and Fox on May 15, 2013. Whereas, while in New Guinea during World War II, Captain Lewis Lockhart joined the 39th Fighter Squadron, a group that is formed by World War I by flyers such as Jimmy Doolittle and Eddie Rickenbacker. And whereas Captain Lockhart endangered his life daily by flying through the 13,000-foot peaks of the Owen Stanley Mountains in New Guinea to bomb and strafe the Japanese 9th Fleet headquarters on Kariru Island. And whereas the 39th Fighter Squadron cut off transport ships from mainland Japan and totally destroyed Japanese planes and ships at Wewak, New Guinea. And whereas conditions became so bad for Japanese soldiers and sailors stationed on Kariru Island that they fantasized about food and painted chickens green to camouflage them from the repeated air attacks by the 39th Fighter Squadron. And whereas Captain Lockhart flew cover combat missions to Hollandia and Rabaul. And whereas Captain Lockhart had to make an emergency landing in his P-38 after one of his engines was destroyed in a combat mission over Rabaul. And whereas Captain Lockhart flew as flight leader when the 39th covered a major parachute drop in the Markham Valley, New Guinea. And whereas Captain Lockhart led the bombing and strafing mission on May 27, 1944, when Second Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe was reported missing. And whereas Captain Lockhart and Second Lieutenant Fred Toby went looking for Captain Thorpe in hazardous flying conditions when the entire squadron was grounded. And whereas Captain Lockhart flew as a wingman when his squadron leader had to bail out and escape from hostile natives in New Guinea, a story that was captured in a documentary, quote, Injury Slight, unquote. And whereas Captain Lockhart flew a total of 171 combat missions in the P-38 and the P-47. And whereas, as a testimony to Captain Lockhart's heroic service to our nation during World War II, he received the Air Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. And whereas the 39th Fighter Squadron, together with other units of the 5th Air Force, is credited with preventing New Guinea, and probably Australia, from falling into Japanese hands during the early years of the war in the Pacific. And be it further resolved that this House of Representatives of the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations hereby expresses our gratitude to Captain Lewis Lockhart for his service to our nation during the darkest days of World War II. And be it further resolved that this House respectfully requests the Governor to honor Captain Lewis Lockhart for his extraordinary heroism in the service of our nation, in particular for his efforts to save Second Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe, a Rhode Island hero who lost his life after flying a combat mission for the 39th Fighter Squadron. And be it further resolved that the Secretary of State be and hereby is authorized and directed to transmit a duly certified copies of this resolution to Governor Lincoln Chafee and to Captain Lewis Lockhart.
Presenting a copy of the resolution to Captain Lockhart is Peter Martin, and also Mayor Fung has a resolution also to Captain Lockhart. Thank you for your service, Captain, and thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for, Captain, we can't thank you enough for joining us here this afternoon, for coming all the way from Tennessee. Appreciate that. This time, we'd like to introduce some members of the House of Representatives who have joined us, who have come here today, taking time out of their schedules. They didn't, we meet here at the General Assembly 3 days a week, but this is such an important occasion for us that my colleagues, I'm grateful for you to joining us this afternoon. We have Representative Marvin Abney from Newport, Representative Samuel Azzanaro from Westerly, Representative Stephen Casey from Woonsocket, Representative Duffy Messier from East Providence and Pawtucket, and Representative Lisa Tomaso from West Warwick and Coventry. Thank you very much for joining us. I also want to thank the Permanent Advisory Council to Veterans Affairs for helping to put this program together. They do a great amount of work for us, and we really appreciate it. Would all of the ladies and gentlemen of the Permanent Advisory Council please stand and take a bow? Much deserving. We have many veterans organizations that are joining us here this afternoon. We have Oscar Tassone from the United Veterans Council, who's also the Grand Chef de Grand of the state, 40 plus. Oscar, thank you very much for joining us. And members of the DAV that are here, we also thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We're grateful for that. And we're most grateful to the members of the Patriot Guard Riders, who are always honoring those men and women that have lost their lives in the line of battle. And we thank you for everything that you do, for always joining us and making our ceremonies even more special by your presence. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here this afternoon. And on behalf of the Episcopal Diocese of Providence, Rich Swinberg, who is the United States Army Reserve, is joining us here. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Mr. Thorpe, we offer to you sincerest condolences on the loss of your brother and on the fact that it took so long for the state of Rhode Island to honor your brother. All that he did, his honorable service to this country, was second to none. And on behalf of his country, we are truly grateful. Thank you for being here this afternoon and joining us. I know there are some other family members that are here with you. If you stand just to be recognized. At this time, we'd like to ask Chaplain Reverend Ron Martin Minash, Rhode Island Army National Guard, to deliver a remembrance prayer. Please stand.
Let's unite in prayer. O God, before whom generations rise and pass away, we praise you for all your servants who, having lived this life in faith, now live eternally with you. Especially, we thank you for your servant, Second Lieutenant Robert E. Thorpe, for the gift of his life, for the grace you have given him, for all in him that was good and kind and faithful, for his heroism, his dependability and gallantry, coupled with his bravery and unselfishness to duty. Support his country, his family, and all of us. They love him, and we say now and here, we love him too. We thank you that for him death is past and pain is ended, and he has entered the joy you have prepared. Holy name we pray. Amen.
Please stand. Please remain standing as taps is rendered by Sergeant Clifford Soares, Rhode Island National Guard. Sergeant. General, would you please order the retirement of the colors?
Tie the colors.
I'd like to thank the members of the Rhode Island Army National Guard with the Color Guard this afternoon. We really appreciate their joining us. On behalf of His Excellency the Governor, the Speaker, Gordon Fox, the House of Representatives, all my colleagues in the House of Representatives, Mayor Fung, would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon. We have a coalition in the House Lounge if you'd like to join us. Thank you very much for joining us.
You just watched a special memorial tribute to the late Robert Thorpe, a gentleman from Cranston, Rhode Island. And I must admit to you, before this day, I was not familiar with Lieutenant Thorpe, but I certainly am now. His story is certainly a tragic one, but it's also a very interesting one. And I don't know about you, but every time I hear the playing of taps, I get a lump in my throat. And a lot of folks were here that are service members, both past and present, people that serve on the Veterans Advisory Committee. We hope to get a couple of words with Chairman Gallison and Representative Martin, as well as some of the key participants. This gentleman was shot down in 1944. And as if that was not bad enough, he certainly was a victim of tremendous cruelty, brutality, and severe war crimes. So we hope to get Rep. Martin and Chairman Gallison over here to talk to us just a moment, because it was their work that made this particular event happen. I have with me Representative Peter Martin of Newport. Representative Martin, first of all, congratulations on what was such an appropriate and magnificent presentation today.
Thank you, Dave. It was a long time coming, but we did right for Robert Thorpe. He gave his life for our country. Least we could do is give him a little recognition. We did that today. I'm grateful for all the help I got from all the people that pulled this together, and we got it done.
Your good friend Ken Dooley was instrumental in getting this information to you in the first place. How did he first become aware of it?
I think you're going to have to ask Ken, but he was working on this. He grew up with the Thorpe people, Gil Thorpe and the family, so he knew that Robert Thorpe had died in the war, and he knew that there had been never given any honors to him. So maybe we could have Ken come over and talk to you.
I certainly hope so. Is there any reasonable likelihood that after this many years, his remains can be located and returned to his family and returned to his country?
We're not sure of that, but I will let the audience know that on Memorial Day, there will be a ceremony at the Veterans Cemetery in Exeter, at which point he will be awarded the Rhode Island Star.
Well, I'll tell you what, I was touched by the stories. I'm sure many of our viewers were. I want to thank you so very, very much in helping put this together.
Thank you, Dave. It's always good to be with you.
And we hope to talk to a couple of more folks. If we can get Ken Dooley over here. Ken, I was struck at your knowledge of this particular event. I was also not aware that the Japanese government was not a part of the Geneva Convention.
They never ratified it. That was one of their excuses.
These gentlemen, if it's fair to call them that, from Japan, who took part in this brutal, vicious attack on this man after his plane was shot down, they were tried for war crimes, if I understand your comments correctly.
They were in 1948. The five of them went on trial. The Admiral Sato had committed suicide. He's the one that gave. But Okuma, the man that orchestrated the execution, and Captain Nodo, and Fujihara and Yamamoto, who had actually fired, they used them for target practice. And Ogaswa was the man who actually did the beheading.
I want to ask you, too, the same question I asked Representative Martin. In your research, in your Freedom of Information Act requests that you filed, and all of the documents that you were able to glean from our government, do you think that there is any reasonable likelihood that his remains can be found and one day returned to his family?
Well, it's been so long, and we have had some reports. There are still headhunters in that area, and they practice some sort of, we're just worried that the bones might have been used. We don't know. But at least today, there was some closure for the family.
Well, it was a marvelous tribute, and I thank you for all of your work and all of your research. You've done a marvelous amount of work historically in our state. We last interviewed you with the John Gordon case, the last gentleman executed here, and quite possibly wrongly, right over where the Providence Place Mall now stands. And it was a fascinating story. And although the story today of Lieutenant Thorpe was tragic, it was also interesting in learning the way that some of the tactics our enemies would use against our armed forces. And a real tribute to you for participating in this marvelous event today.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure talking to you. Always a pleasure indeed. We hope to get Captain Lockhart over. If we can speak to Captain Lockhart, I have a couple of questions. Captain, if we could just talk to you for a moment, since you had the occasion to serve in the military with Lieutenant Thorpe. I've always had an interest in aviation. Back on that day when he was shot down in 1944, what kind of aircraft were you flying then?
P-47.
And what was that plane capable of doing? What kind of speeds could you fly at, and how effective was it as a fighting force?
Well, we used it mostly as dive bombing and strafing. On that mission, we were on a bombing and strafing mission to Wewak, which was a Japanese stronghold on the northern coast of New Guinea. We were carrying two 500-pound bombs, one under each wing, and then the P-47 had 8 50-caliber machine guns, and we were strafing with those 50-caliber machine guns when Bob got hit by ground fire and went down in the water.
But he survived that. He was able to survive that crash, which is in and of itself kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's right. He found later on we found out that he found a log to keep him afloat, but he was picked up by the Japanese, and that was the end of it. He was tortured and beheaded there on that island.
What do you remember about Lieutenant Thorpe, working with him and serving with him? How would you describe him to our viewers?
Well, very nice guy. I'll say this, he was an excellent pilot. He joined the squadron in January of '44, and I had been in the squadron flying P-38s from March of '43 when he got there. At that time, we were changed over to the P-47. So I had more combat time, but he had a lot of time in the P-47. And I flew a lot of missions with him. Some of them as he was my wingman, and some of them he was in other flights. On the flight that he went down on, he was in another flight, but he didn't come back to the briefing, and after that we never knew what happened until Ken Dooley found out for us.
Well, listen, Captain, I want to thank you for your participation in today's event. I want to thank you for talking to us, but more importantly, sir, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain.
Okay.
I don't know. I think we may have Gil Thorpe, the captain's or the lieutenant's brother. We're scheduled to talk to him as well. He was participating in this event, and Ken Dooley grew up with him, and that's how this story actually came about. I don't know if he's stepped away or if we still have a chance to speak to him. But at any rate, today's event was certainly touching. It was, again, extremely, extremely tragic, but we hope to get Gil Thorpe over here for just a moment and get his take on all of this. When your father was shot down in 1944, tell us about your family. Tell us about the Thorpe family.
Oh, the Thorpe family, my dad was a pharmacist, and I was in high school. My sister was in high school, and Bobby went off to, we watched him go and train and were very excited about everything. And the truth be, a Sunday afternoon, which was very quiet in our house, we had my grandmother living with us, and my mother and dad were off to their friends playing cards.
And I presume this was in the Cranston area?
Yeah,
okay.
This is right in Edgewood. And two servicemen, two officers came to the front door, and I answered it. And I was handed an envelope, and that was it.
Well, and that was that notification.
Missing in action.
And what did the family do next? What kind of follow-up was there from the military? You knew that he had been shot down. Were they able to give you many particulars back then, do you recall?
No. It was tough on Mom and Dad. We were young.
Well, I can only empathize with where your family must be coming from. But how heartwarming is this event today to hear the governor, the chairman, Representative Martin, and others pay tribute to your brother? It has to make you feel pretty darn proud.
It's very meaningful to me. And the real thing is, with what they honored Bob with, I say Bob is part of the generation where there's so many more out there that should be honored, but they can't be.
Right.
So I stand here with Bob and give honors to other people.
Well, listen, Mr. Thorpe, we salute your brother, your family, and we thank you so much for talking to us.
Appreciate it.
My best to you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, again, we hope you've enjoyed this special tribute to Lieutenant Robert Thorpe. And I was wondering today how I could wrap up such a touching and such a heartfelt tribute to this fallen soldier. And you heard Jimmy Doolittle referenced a couple of times during the presentation, a very, very famous pilot. He once said, "The first lesson is that you can't lose a war if you have command of the air, and you can't win a war if you haven't." And certainly, Lieutenant Thorpe helped contribute to our command of the air. And one other military quote from one of my favorite members of the military, George S. Patton. He said, "Live for something rather than die for nothing." We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and memorial tribute to Lieutenant Robert Thorpe. From the chamber of the Rhode Island House of Representatives for Capitol Television, I'm Dave Barber.
You're watching Capitol